What's up, YouTube? This is Strydent. Um, Remember games like Double Dragon or Super Double Dragon, like I got pictured here? Those games where you and your friends or a friend would just team up and beat the shit out of everybody else so you could save your friends or your girlfriend? Games like Turtles in Time, where all four of you could jump together and do the same thing? Or like X-Men, the old school Pride of the X-Men game where it was 6 of you versus the world. Um, there were even games like Fighting Force. It wasn't really that good. My brother and I turned it into pure comedy. Gekido, horrible, horrible, horrible attempt. Um, Beatdown, pretty, but really lame. And then games like Urban Reign, where they're getting so much closer to what we all know as Streets of Rage. Now, Streets of Rage was the shit. Streets of Rage was an old Genesis game, I believe came out in 1991. It's known as Bare Knuckle in Japan. It just was an awesome game. It was kind of probably the result of watching too many Hong Kong action films, but it had a style and a identity that was just so slick for a 16-bit game. The story or premise was really simple. You and your friends are a bunch of ex-cops, and you live in a city that has been taken over essentially by this syndicate run by the villainous Mr. X. Mr. X pretty much has managed to use his syndicate to infiltrate every single aspect of the city you live in, even the police force. You guys just got sick of it. You quit the police force and took the matters into your own hands. And now all of us have seen this kind of flick, once or twice or maybe 1,000 times, but it's a simple premise that gives you a lot of room to have a lot of action. Now, the place where this game shines is music. Yuzo Koshiro did the music for the game, and this guy's a genius. He did music for tons of other games. He did Shinobi's music, he did ActRaiser. He also, probably more recently, like the last 10, 15 years, he did the music for Shenmue. Well, some of the music for it. Dude is awesome. But the music gave the game a style and an identity that separated it from other games, on the same console and on other consoles. It's as if this game obviously was inspired somewhat by games like Final Fight. More people played Final Fights because so many people had Nintendos, but this game, it overtook Final Fight by a huge margin. It just was more imaginative, and the characters were better, more well thought out. They weren't recycled Street Fighter stuff, you know what I mean? Which Capcom always does, but we're not going to talk about that. But this game it was awesome. It was its own entity. The games got better as the series went on. The story kind of, followed the same plot, but they added to it, New characters showed up. Characters got captured and you were saving them, and it just was an awesome game and it was fun. Now, I started to do this review because I saw reviews on YouTube where it's as if people forgot what made this game really good. People complained about simple things like the special attack guy showing up on the boat or showing up in the construction site, and they're like, how did it get there, and blah blah blah. That is all irrelevant because this is one of those games that came out around the time when Battletoads was out, And if you could play Battletoads or Battletoads and Double Dragon and you could stomach that kind of stuff, there's no need to even think about how some of this stuff happened. It was awesome, it was epic, it was its own thing, and the fans loved it. They loved it so much that they even tried to remake it themselves, and they succeeded in my opinion. I just wish Sega would go out there and pay these guys, buy the game, and start selling it so that the rest of us could play it on our PlayStation 3s and our Xboxes or whatever system you have that, is relevant at the time. So one thing that I really dug about the series was that the characters actually kind of grow and, they get different jobs and they, bounce back from the fact that they quit their job as cops in the beginning. So there was kind of development. I mean, Skate kind of gets a little bit bigger, but he stays a kid for most of the series. But I just like the fact that the game somehow managed to last all this time. Now, a funny thing is, the game Fighting Force was conceived as a kind of a successor to Streets of Rage. I think at one point in time it was supposed to actually be the next, the updated Streets of Rage for what at the time was the next gen system, the PS1. and that all fell through horribly. But Sega tried again when the Dreamcast came out, and they made a game called, actually it was before the Dreamcast, it was on the Saturn first. It was called Dynamite Deca. Then they tried again on, or Dynamite Cop in the US. Then they tried again on the Dreamcast. I mean, all these games came out in the arcades, but I'm just covering the home system versions. They did one on the Dreamcast called Dynamite Cop. It was a similar fight, similar control scheme, except that it was really, really strange and goofy, and like the combos were kind of absurd. It was almost like the old WrestleMania in your house, WrestleMania, the arcade game, Williams, fighting games. The excessive combos, they were just goofy looking things. I mean, like you could shoot a nuke off on the ship and then the ship didn't actually blow up, because I think the second game took place on the ship, whereas the first one was kind of a parody of Die Hard. I think in the arcade it was released as Die Hard Arcade, the first game. But anyway, Sega tried, but somehow those games, I mean, they were fun, but they were really unforgiving, and they didn't have the style. The music sucked. It just didn't have the intensity and the character that Streets of Rage has, which is one thing that keeps on, proving to the people out there at Sega that are making these kind of games, or making games in general, that this kind of game should not have died out when we moved to the 64 and 128-bit systems, because they kept trying on the 32-bit systems, but they would always do a shitty job instead of recreating what it was that made these games interesting. They tried with the recent Turtles in Time remake, but somehow updating it and changing the way the game plays screws up the elements that make the game amazing. Streets of Rage is just one of those rare, old school games that's an example of what you can do with just a little bit. You can go so far if you're clever in how you use what you have. The music, the sound effects, even the system it was made for was not the most powerful system. But if you simplify, a lot of times you home in on the things that are extremely necessary to make a game fun and engaging, and then you amp those things up. Color and all those other things, you get around that with really good art direction, and this game had it. It had it in spades. My favorite of the series, though, is Streets of Rage 3. It's probably the hardest of the three as far as difficulty goes, but it's extremely fast-paced, and the fact that the game's levels kind of branch off, that adds a lot to, the fun factor. My brother and I, it took years before we actually could beat the game without dying, and still sometimes it just, you just lose a life. You got to kind of manage your lives, because there are parts where the game is just completely ignorant about beating you down, and being unforgiving. But part of the fun is that it encourages teamwork. If you work together as a team properly and you have your little tag team maneuvers down and you figure out your little locks and things to trick the computer, you're unstoppable. And so many games these days do not focus on those kind of things. Everything is a competitive everything. It's not much of a team effort. And in this, it's you versus all the gangs in your city, and they're probably shipping in thugs from other places too, so you need to rely on one another. And that's something I really dug about the game, because I'm older, and also my brother and I always teamed up on things. So, even now, my best friend and I, when we play games online and stuff, we like to play the more action-oriented games as a team, or we play like Rainbow Six or something like that online as a team, and we have a bunch of guys that we play with that, they know what they're doing, So, I don't know. It was more fun. They also added some more character by doing English voices for the characters, at least in the US version. The characters got redesigned. I didn't like the color selection for Axel, and Adam wasn't in the game as a playable character, but he helped you. He made cameos. But overall, the game had really slick music. It was really hardcore, and I don't know, it was just a really fun playthrough. It took a long time to get it, though, but once we got it, it was awesome.